Hello, this is Pastor Rick, and I want to welcome you to this Sunday Forum for April the 14th, where we have an exciting, a scary theme. And our theme is, are you afraid of ghosts? Are you afraid of ghosts? Now, oddly enough, that is at the heart of our text for this Sunday, where Jesus appears to the disciples and they think he's a ghost and they are afraid. So to identify with this story, first of all, we have to see Jesus appears to Mary in the garden. She doesn't recognize him. Then he appears to the disciples on the road to Emmaus. They don't recognize him. Then he appears to the disciples in this locked room, and they don't recognize him either. They think it's a ghost, and they're frightened to death. And we get that, right? Because aren't we afraid of ghosts? Well, let me show you a video clip, because the internet is full of sightings of ghosts that are caught on camera. Fortunately, or maybe unfortunately, we have cameras that tell the stories. Let's watch and enjoy.
Uninvited house guest.
What is it? Is it real? And what is it doing there? Alan Campbell went to the home to see for himself.
Joshua Higgins and Heather Bruff claim that their Highland, Michigan home is haunted. They say that they have heard unexplained footsteps up and down the stairs, and even an angry male voice screaming and laughing in the night. But the couple, who live in the house with their 15-month-old daughter, say that the frightening occurrences don't stop there. One night, Heather catches a glimpse of something absolutely terrifying on her daughter's nanny cam. Heather immediately runs upstairs.
I freaked out. I stopped what I was doing and I ran upstairs and I grabbed my daughter.
She was horrified to find that her daughter had several mysterious scratches across her face.
Heather says this so-called ghost scratched her daughter Lily and attacked her too.
It scares us that it could do something else.
The couple plans to move out of the house as soon as they can afford it. For now, they are sleeping in the same room with baby Lily every night.
Okay, so our culture does grapple with ghosts from time to time. They appear, and of course, we've all sat around campfires and told ghost stories, or maybe we were all alone in our bedroom with a friend and they were good storytellers and they scared us with a good ghost story. Well, again, that's behind this wonderful text that we have from Luke 24, where Jesus shows up and they think it's a ghost. But here it is. It's not just a ghost story, so to speak. In the Bible, there were all sorts of views about spiritual beings, even including the sun and the moon as spiritual beings. And so we have to hear those stories, especially this week as we saw the eclipse of the sun. So let's review how the biblical authors viewed spiritual beings, and then we'll come back afterward to the story of Luke 24. Enjoy.
If you pick up the Bible, you don't have to read far before you meet the main character, God.
Yeah, he appears in the Bible's first sentence. And then later on page 1, you meet the humans.
And there you have it. The two main players in the Bible, God and humans on the stage of our world.
Well, not quite. In the Bible, there's actually a way bigger cast of characters than just humans and God.
Like who?
I mean the figures called the Elohim in the Hebrew scriptures. Angels, the Satan, demons, they're all over the story.
Oh, right. Spiritual beings. To be honest, I've never really known what to do with them. It's all kind of weird.
And unfortunately, almost all of our modern conceptions about these beings are based on serious misunderstandings.
All right, so let's talk about spiritual beings in the story of the Bible.
So first thing we have to do is reorient ourselves to how the ancient biblical authors saw the world. On pages 1 and 2 of Genesis, God brings order to a watery wilderness, separating the skies above from the land below.
Right, this is Earth, where we live, and then there's the heavens high above, which they saw as God's domain.
But in the Bible, these spaces are not separate. They overlap. And in fact, the Garden of Eden is described throughout the Bible as a high mountain garden where heaven and earth are one.
Cool.
So that's the world. Now it needs some creatures. God first creates and appoints the sun, moon, and stars to rule the day and night.
You mean the giant flaming gas balls in the sky?
Well, that's how you think about them. But the biblical authors, like all ancient people, saw them as heavenly creatures that are glorious, shining bright, and high above.
Which is strange. I don't think of stars as creatures.
Well, you don't. But for the biblical authors, the stars formed their categories for thinking and talking about a spiritual reality that exists alongside ours. And it's a different kind of reality, just like the sky is different from the land. And it's populated with creatures that have different kinds of bodies, shiny spiritual bodies.
Okay, so almost all ancient cultures thought of the stars as divine beings, including the ancient Israelites.
But the biblical authors make clear that these beings are not God. Rather, they're images of God. Their glory and high status is a reflection of the Creator's glory and status, and they exist to serve His purposes.
So the stars symbolize beings who are like God's heavenly staff team.
Right. Now let's go back, because after God appointed the heavenly host, He also appointed another type of creature.
The humans.
Yeah, in Hebrew they're called Adam, which sounds like the Hebrew word for dirt because that's what they're made of.
So glorious rulers above and hairy sapiens below.
But then comes the great twist. God tells the lowly humans that they are to rule all of creation. He invites them to rise above their dirty origins and share in God's glory as His partners.
So God wants to rule the world through humans and not the spiritual beings.
Exactly. This is how the poet of Psalm 8 understood the stories of Genesis. He looked up at the stars and says,
"What is humanity that you consider him? You made him lower than the spiritual beings, but crowned him with glory and divine majesty."
This is humanity's high calling, to rule creation in the love and power of God.
Very cool.
But not everyone's happy. We're introduced to a spiritual being who doesn't want humans to rule, so he tricks them into thinking that they can get divine power on their own terms.
They're deceived and they take the opportunity.
So they're banished from the Eden Mountain, exiled to wander the earth and return to the dust.
This snake is bad news.
Yeah, and as you read on, you discover that he's part of a spiritual rebellion that follows the humans outside of Eden, and things get worse from here.
The humans still desire to rule, so they start a new project.
Yes, in the Bible, this is called Babylon. It's the anti-Eden, where human and spiritual rebels join together to elevate themselves back to their former glory. And so, with all that in mind, we can now appreciate the full cast of characters that we meet in the biblical story.
God, humans, and all of the spiritual beings.
Exactly. And so here's a preview of what we're going to explore. We'll see how this whole story leads to Jesus, the one who overcomes evil, reunites heaven and earth, so that a new humanity can partner with God.
Okay, now we are ready to come back to this story in Luke 24. There's all this rich understanding of spiritual beings, including ghosts. And so when Jesus appears in this story of Luke 24, now we'll show another clip of what is happening in Luke all the way up to this appearance in the locked room, and you can better understand how the disciples are trying to understand this resurrected Jesus who is now the new humanity. Enjoy the story.
We've been looking at the story of Jesus as it's told in Luke's gospel. It begins with the arrival of an unlikely king born in poor, humble circumstances.
Then we saw Jesus as a teacher and prophet. He went throughout Israel calling people to a radical way of life, where enemies become friends, the poor are cared for, where people find forgiveness for their failures.
He went from town to town inviting people to follow him and live under God's reign in this upside-down way.
And he did many signs and wonders, so many Israelites began to hope that he would rescue Israel from the Romans and set up a new kingdom of peace and justice. In short, that he would bring the kingdom of God.
Now, the religious leaders of the day were also hoping for God's kingdom, but to them, the message of Jesus was a threat.
Yeah, they had expected to gain power and prestige when this all went down. But Jesus said God's kingdom belongs to the poor, to the outsider, and that real power is serving others in love.
This conflict intensified when Jesus, while in Jerusalem, disrupted the temple sacrifices and called Israel's leaders a gang of rebels.
So they arrested Jesus, and they had him accused before the Roman authorities of being a rebel king. He was handed over for execution, even though he was innocent. Then he was taken outside the city and put to death on false charges.
This brings us to the final section of the Gospel of Luke. There was a religious leader named Joseph who opposed Jesus' execution and then requested to be given his body so he could bury Jesus in a nearby tomb.
And then, a couple of days later, some women who had followed Jesus came to visit that tomb, and they found it open and empty, and they encountered these mysterious figures telling them Jesus was alive from the dead. So they run away terrified. Nobody believes their report. I mean, he can't be alive. They all saw him die.
Now, just outside of Jerusalem, a pair of Jesus' followers were leaving the city, traveling on a road to a town called Emmaus, and they were sad and confused about everything that had happened.
Then Jesus shows up, walking alongside them, but they don't know it's him.
Yeah, that's weird. Why couldn't they recognize him?
Yeah, it's an odd but really significant image for Luke. They're blind to Jesus for some reason. So Jesus asks them, "What are you guys talking about?"
And they begin to tell him about Jesus, a powerful prophet who they expected would rescue Israel, but was instead executed. Some women say he's alive, which is crazy. It's all too much. We're going home.
So Jesus tries to explain that this is what the Jewish scriptures had been pointing to all along, that Israel needed a king who would suffer and die as a rebel on behalf of those who actually are rebels. And then he would be vindicated by his resurrection so he could give true life to those who would receive it.
But it's still not making sense. They're as confused as ever.
Which leads to the scene where they sit down for a meal with Jesus. He takes the bread, he blesses it, breaks it, and gives it to them, just as he did at the Last Supper.
Yeah, this is the image of his broken body, his death on the cross.
And it's when they take in the broken bread, that's when their eyes are open to see Jesus. Then he disappears, and the episode's over.
So this is a story about how it's hard to see Jesus for who he really is.
Yes, this is brilliant. I mean, how could God's royal power and love be revealed through this man's shameful execution? How could a humble man become the king of the world through weakness and self-sacrifice? It's very hard to see. But this is the message of the Gospel of Luke. It takes a transformation of your imagination to see it and embrace Jesus' upside-down kingdom.
The Gospel of Luke ends with Jesus and all of his disciples together over another meal. And everyone's freaking out about his resurrected body. I mean, he's still a human, but way more.
Yes, he's passed through death and come out the other side, a walking, talking piece of new creation. And then Jesus tells them that he's going to give them the same divine power that sustained him, so they can go out and share the good news of God's kingdom with other people.
After this, Luke tells us that Jesus was taken up into heaven, which is a cool exit and all, but why disappear into the sky?
So in the Old Testament, the skies are the place of God's throne. They're above everything. So this is Luke's way of showing that Jesus has been enthroned as the divine king of the whole world.
His followers stay in Jerusalem, worshiping God and Jesus, waiting for this new power, and this is where the gospel ends.
Now, Luke is going to write about how they receive this power and take the news out into the world, and that's what his second volume, the book of Acts, is all about.